Hello bumblebee enthusiasts, and welcome to this video on identifying bumblebees. When going out to conduct atlas surveys, it's important to be able to identify an insect as a bumblebee. This may seem like an easy task since bumblebees are big and fuzzy, but there are a surprising number of similar looking insects out there, so recognizing a bumblebee as a bumblebee is more challenging than one might first expect. This video will help you know what to look for when discerning if the insect you're seeing is in fact a bumblebee. Let's start with a little quiz. Take a look at these 8 pictures and identify how many of the insects pictured here do you think are bumblebees. Your answer was 1, you are correct. But it's pretty common for us to get answers ranging from 0 all the way to 8 when asking this question to an in-person audience. Apart from the highlighted picture, all of these insects are flies. Flies can be excellent mimics of bumblebees. Bumblebees can also be confused with honeybees, carpenter bees, and other native bees like digger or longhorn bees. So let's talk about what to look for. To begin, we'll take a look at bumblebee anatomy. Bumblebees are insects, so just like every other insect, they have an exoskeleton, 3 body segments, the head, thorax, and abdomen, and 6 legs attached to the thorax. To discern them from look-alike insects, it's important to recognize these key characteristics. Bumblebees have 4 wings, a front and a hind wing on each side. They have long, relatively long, jointed antennae, and their large compound eyes are on the sides of their heads. A really key feature is the corbicula, or pollen basket. The back leg of a female bumblebee, other than cuckoo bumblebees, has a concave, shiny area surrounded by long hairs used to carry pollen. Bumblebees also have relatively large, round, hairy bodies, and the color patterns we see are the colors of the hairs on their head, thorax, and abdomen, not the color of the underlying exoskeleton. Here's a photo showing that pollen basket. Notice the wide, triangular, shiny segment of the back leg that's surrounded by long hairs. This is where the female bee will pack and carry her pollen. This characteristic is really obvious when the pollen basket is full, but it can be much more difficult to notice, especially with the naked eye, when the pollen basket is empty. As we saw in the opening quiz, there are a lot of flies that look like bumblebees, so let's start with how to distinguish bumblebees from flies. The first thing to look for is the number of wings. Bumblebees have 4 wings, a front wing and a hind wing on both sides. This can be very difficult to see on a flying bumblebee or even a bee at rest. But you can see all 4 wings in this picture, and when you're taking pictures of chilled bumblebees for atlas surveys, you'll be able to see the 4 wings if you gently pry the wings apart. Flies only have 2 wings. Their hind wings are modified as small club-shaped structures called halteres. In bumblebees, the entire body is hairy, and the colors that we observe are the colors of the hairs. In many flies, the bodies don't have as much hair, and the colors we see are the colors of the exoskeleton, not the hair. But be careful with this. There are definitely some exceptions. Some flies are covered in colorful hairs that look very similar to bumblebees' patterns, like this predatory bee mimic robber fly. Another characteristic to look at is the eyes. Bumblebees' large compound eyes are on the sides of their heads, with a great deal of space between the 2 eyes where the antennae attach. Flies typically have much larger eyes, taking up almost their entire heads. Finally, look at the antennae. Bumblebees have long, jointed antennae, while flies have shorter, stubby antennae. This might be one of the easiest characteristics to notice on bee mimicking flies. So let's see how you do now. Is the insect pictured here a bumblebee or a fly? If you said fly, you're correct. While the colorful hairs can be misleading, this insect has 2 wings, very large eyes, and short stubby antennae, making it a fly. Another insect that is sometimes confused for bumblebees, especially midsummer when the bumblebees we see are smaller workers instead of the large queens observed in the spring, is the honeybee. So let's talk about how to distinguish honeybees from bumblebees. One thing to look at is the shape of the bee's body. Honeybees are more torpedo-shaped, while bumblebees are rounder and chunkier. Also pay attention to the colors on the body. Remember, bumblebees' color comes from the color of their body hairs. The black, orange, and brown colors of honeybees is the color of the exoskeleton under the hair, not the hairs themselves. Honeybees and bumblebees both carry pollen and pollen baskets on their hind legs. That means in our area, any bee carrying pollen in this way will be either a honeybee or a bumblebee. The last characteristic is difficult to see when observing a bee out on the landscape, but it is a pretty fun fact and something interesting to look for when photographing bees or looking at them with a hand lens. Honeybees have hairy eyes. So let's see how you do now. Which of these 5 insects are honeybees and which are bumblebees? How'd you do? This takes practice for sure. The more you look at and photograph your local bees, the more you'll start to notice these key differences. There have been a lot of volunteers or community members that ask about the black bumblebees that they've observed. Most likely what these volunteers are observing are carpenter bees, not bumblebees. Carpenter bees are large and noticeable just like bumblebees, so let's talk about how to tell the two groups apart. Remember that bumblebees are covered in hairs on all parts of their bodies. Notice that this carpenter bee's abdomen is shiny because it's got fewer hairs there. Also remember the key detail of looking for how pollen is carried. This carpenter bee doesn't have a shiny concave pollen basket on its back leg. That's an important detail to notice. Across the West, many carpenter bee species are predominantly black. We don't have any bumblebee species that are all black like this. But again, we need to be careful. Some carpenter bees, like this one, do have yellow on the thorax and on T1, making them look really similar to species like the brown-belted bumblebee, the two-spot bumblebee, or the common eastern bumblebee. In this case, remember to look for the shiny abdomen and the lack of a pollen basket. Finally, let's take a look at some native solitary bees. Bumblebees are not the only native bees that are large and fuzzy. There are quite a few species known as digger bees or longhorn bees that are also large and fuzzy. Key characteristic to look for with this group of solitary bees is how they carry their pollen. Remember, bumblebees will have a pollen basket, and their pollen will be a waxy-looking ball on that hind leg. These other solitary bees have long pollen-carrying hairs on their legs that make them look like they're wearing fancy leg warmers. Their entire legs can be covered in pollen. Here are some examples of native solitary bees that have been mistaken for bumblebees by our volunteers. It's a very easy mistake to make. Look at how these bees are carrying their pollen, though. Also, once you've looked at and photographed a bunch of different bumblebees, you'll start to notice that the faces of these other species often look different. It could be that their faces have yellow on the exoskeleton under the hairs, or that their eyes are kind of bluish or greenish, or you might just identify that something about that face just looks a little bit off. If you're not sure if the bee you've captured is a bumblebee or a solitary bee, please don't hesitate to photograph it and submit it. We have a Not a Bumblebee button that we can use when we go through and verify observations. In fact, going to bumblebeewatch.org and clicking on Bumblebee Sightings and then searching for Not a Bumblebee under species is a great way to see a large variety of insects that look similar to bumblebees and that have been observed by our volunteers across North America. It can be a great way to learn what to watch for. As we've just discussed, there are a lot of insects out there that look like bumblebees, but aren't. Please don't let this stop you from conducting Bumblebee Atlas surveys and submitting your incidental observations. If you aren't sure what you're looking at is a bumblebee, the Atlas is a great way to learn. Please know that it's okay to take and submit photos if you're not sure. A member of our Bumblebee Atlas team looks at every photo that's submitted. And please don't feel bad if we mark something as not a bumblebee. We're all on the same team, learning about these fascinating animals and their lookalikes.